Matsushita's own engineers described the result as 99% identical to a standard DVD, but that remaining 1% was important. It made it unreadable by anything outside Nintendo's hardware. Nintendo's GameCube shipped with a disc roughly 8 centimeters across. It fit in the palm of your hand, and when it did, it felt lighter, almost delicate, compared to the weight of a standard DVD. This was all deliberate, and it wasn't just about storage. This is the story of that 1%, what Nintendo bought with it, and what it cost them in storage, in retail perception, and with an entire category of buyers who walked out of the store with a PlayStation 2 instead. By 2001, disc already meant something specific in most households: movies, games, menus, chapter selection, hours of content, a family renting a film one night and loading a game the next without switching devices. It was the expectation at the time, and the PlayStation 2 was not going to be the exception. The Xbox followed too, and both machines sat on the same shelf and spoke the same media dialect as everything else in the room. The printed label ring was smaller, just like the plastic spindle hub in the case it came in. Almost everything about it separated it from other options in the market. The purple console lid opened from the top, the tiny disc dropped in, and before any game loaded, the physical object had already announced something: this machine was going to be different. Of course, this was all deliberate, and it wasn't just about storage. Nintendo already understood what format control looked like. They were leading in the industry. The Nintendo 64 used cartridges, which were expensive to produce, slow to duplicate, and limited in capacity, but tightly governed. Of course, this didn't come without a severe trade-off. Publishers migrated to cheaper platforms, and the cost per unit pushed retail prices higher than disc-based competitors. An optical format saw the economics, so the logical move was to adopt the standard DVD, which delivered maximum capacity, existing pressing infrastructure, and built-in secondary use as a media player. Instead, Nintendo made the bold move to choose a proprietary medium and developed in partnership with Matsushita, the parent company of Panasonic, using a modified mini DVD class form factor that was incompatible with standard DVD drives. The instinct behind it was old: keep the supply chain close and keep the gatekeeping physical. The cost of that choice showed up immediately in storage. A standard DVD of the era held roughly 4.7 gigabytes on a single layer. By comparison, the GameCube disc held approximately 1.5 gigabytes. For developers building large titles, that difference shaped every asset decision from the start of production. Audio tracks were compressed more aggressively, full-motion video sequences were shortened, reduced in resolution, or cut entirely. Texture budgets were managed against a hard ceiling that competing platforms did not impose as tightly. Studios building cross-platform titles even shaped their GameCube versions differently, with tighter compression pipelines, trim bonus content, and assets resized to fit the smaller disc. Some titles had to ship 2 discs, meaning a prompt mid-game would ask the player to open the lid, remove one disc, and load up another. Each of these moments was the storage ceiling surfacing in a player's hands, the format's boundary becoming visible at the point of use. Capacity constraints were visible and the copy control logic was quieter. A standard DVD could be easily duplicated with widely available consumer hardware by the early 2000s. DVD burners were arriving in home computers. A game pressed onto a standard disc faced a low barrier to unauthorized copying. All you needed was a blank DVD, a desktop drive, and some time to make it happen. The GameCube's custom format changed this. The disc's size, data layout, and read behavior were tuned to a specific layer assembly inside the console. So casual home duplication was no longer an afternoon project anyone could do. It's not like it was impossible, but it raised the barrier high enough that you had to be a certain kind of specialized individual to get it done. Earlier cartridge-based systems used lockout chips, which we've mentioned before on this channel. The small authentication circuits verified whether a cartridge was authorized before the console would boot. Similarly, the GameCube disc carried that same logic into the optical domain, so the format itself became a verification layer already baked into every pressed disc. And that is where you could see the disc crossing from engineering into business architecture. Control over the physical medium meant control over who could publish. A developer needed access to Nintendo's proprietary disc pressing pipeline, which in turn meant approved facilities, controlled copy volumes, licensing checkpoints, etc., all to ship a finished product. The disc looked and was, by all measures, a consumer good: printed art, reflective surface, retail case, but underneath it functioned as a platform credential, a contract. The GameCube disc held both data and boundaries, and the boundary that cut deepest was the one consumers saw most clearly: no DVD movie playback. It was easy to see how a home console that also played movies was all the justification an adult who wouldn't play video games needed to buy the device. Many kids would use this excuse to beg their parents to get the console. The PlayStation 2 was widely credited with accelerating DVD adoption precisely because it doubled as a movie player at a competitive price point. The Xbox followed the same logic. It was an important feature that would appear in all the right places for consumers to see. But on the charts where the comparisons were made, the GameCube was missing the DVD Playback Checkmark. Such a simple thing, but one that could turn a yes into a no. Keeping the feature set narrow was not just about control, though. A standard DVD-capable device required licensing fees to multiple patent pools, something like $20 per unit in combined royalties for DVD decoding, audio codecs, and content scrambling technology. Including movie playback also meant region coding and content licensing expectations. It's clear that the cost of adding that compatibility involved too many fees and obligations that pulled the console closer to the home entertainment category Nintendo wanted to distance the GameCube from. The Panasonic Q proved the refusal was a choice. This hybrid device with a brushed metal finish, a full-size DVD tray, and a remote control sold exclusively in Japan at roughly $315, only to end up being discontinued within 2 years. The Q demonstrated that the technical compatibility existed, and it confirmed that Nintendo preferred licensing the feature out over making it standard. Nothing comes without consequences. Especially on the retail floor, they occupied a different visual footprint on store shelves and retail racks. People just noticed them less. The compact purple shell, the carry handle, the top-loading lid, the miniature disc. Before any game was discussed, the hardware read as a dedicated toy just for kids, in a market increasingly drawn to multi-purpose devices. Of course, the format did not prevent ambitious games from shipping. Several of the console's most respected titles were built with all this in mind, but it did impose a retail perception that no marketing campaign fully overcame. Later, Nintendo hardware carried the same instinct forward. They still used proprietary disc variants or custom media that resisted casual home duplication and kept the platform boundary legible in the physical object itself. Nintendo had their chance to join other consoles, but when the time came, they decided to keep doing what they've been doing, to distinguish themselves from the bulk and protect what they find most important, no matter what the public says.